Book 9, Part 2 of the Aeneid. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. The Aeneid by Publius, Vergilius, Maro. Translated by John Dryden. Book 9a. Night Sortie, a Day Assault. Part 2. But far they had not passed before they spied 300 horse with Volscens for their guide. The queen a legion to King Turnus sent, but the swift horse the slower foot prevent. And now advancing sought the leader's tent. They saw the pair, for thro' the doubtful shade his shining helm Euryalus betray'd, on which the moon with full reflection play'd. "'Tis not for naught," cried Volscens from the crowd, "these men go there." Then raised his voice aloud: "Stand, stand! Why thus in arms, and whither bent? From whence, to whom, and on what errand sent?" Silent they scud away, and haste their flight To neighb'ring woods, and trust themselves to night. The speedy horse all passages belay, And spur their smoking steeds to cross their way, And watch each entrance of the winding wood. Black was the forest, thick with beech it stood, Horrid with fern, and intricate with thorn. Few paths of human feet, or tracks of beasts, were worn. The darkness of the shades his heavy prey, And fear misled the younger from his way. But Nisus hit the turns with happier haste, And, thoughtless of his friend, the forest pass'd, And Alban plains, from Alba's name so call'd, Where King Latinus then his oxen stall'd. Till turning at the length he stood his ground, And miss'd his friend, and cast his eyes around. "Ah wretch!" he cried, "where have I left behind Th' unhappy youth? Where shall I hope to find? Or what way take?" Again he ventures back, And treads the mazes of his former track. He winds the wood, and list'ning hears the noise Of tramping coursers, and the rider's voice. The sound approach'd, and suddenly he view'd The foes inclosing, and his friend pursued, Forelaid and taken, while he strove in vain The shelter of the friendly shades to gain. What should he next attempt? What arms employ? What fruitless force to free the captive boy? Or desperate should he rush, and lose his life, With odds oppress'd in such unequal strife? Resolv'd at length, his pointed spear he shook, And, casting on the moon a mournful look: "Guardian of groves, and goddess of the night, Fair queen," he said, "direct my dart aright. If e'er my pious father, for my sake, Did grateful off'rings on thy altars make, Or I increas'd them with my sylvan toils, And hung thy holy roofs with savage spoils, Give me to scatter these." Then from his ear He pois'd, and aim'd, and launch'd the trembling spear. The deadly weapon, hissing from the grove, Impetuous on the back of Sulmo drove, Pierc'd his thin armour, drank his vital blood, And in his body left the broken. He staggers round, his eyeballs roll in death, And with short sobs he gasps away his breath. All stand amaz'd. A second jav'lin flies With equal strength, and quivers thro' the skies. This thro' thy temples Tagus forc'd the way, And in the brainpan warmly buried lay. Fierce Volscens foams with rage, and, gazing round, Descried not him who gave the fatal wound, Nor knew to fix revenge. "But thou," he cries, "Shalt pay for both," and at the pris'ner flies With his drawn sword. Then, struck with deep despair, That cruel sight the lover could not bear, But from his covert rush'd in open view, And sent his voice before him as he flew. "Me, me!" he cried, "turn all your swords alone! On me the fact confess'd, the fault my own." He neither could nor durst the guiltless youth Ye moon and stars, bear witness to the truth. His only crime, if friendship can offend, is too much love to this unhappy friend. Too late he speaks. The sword, which fury guides, driv'n with full force, had pierc'd his tender sides. Down fell the beauteous youth; the yawning wound Gush'd out a purple stream, and stain'd the ground. His snowy neck reclines upon his breast, Like a fair flow'r by the keen share oppress'd; Like a white poppy sinking on the plain, Whose heavy head is overcharg'd with rain. Despair, and rage, and vengeance justly vow'd, Drove Nisus headlong on the hostile crowd. Volscens he seeks; on him alone he bends, Borne back, and buoy'd by his surrounding friends. Onward he press'd, and kept him still in sight, Then whirl'd aloft his sword with all his might. Th' unerring steel descended while he spoke, Pierc'd his wide mouth, and thro' his weapon broke. Dying he slew, and, stagg'ring on the plain, With swimming eyes he sought his lover slain. Then quiet on his bleeding bosom fell, Content in death to be reveng'd so well. O happy friends! for, if my verse can give Immortal life, your fame shall ever live, Fix'd as the Capitol's foundation lies, And spread where'er the Roman eagle flies. The conqu'ring party first divide the prey, Then their slain leader to the camp convey. With wonder, as they went, the troops were fill'd, To see such numbers whom so few had kill'd. Serranus, Rhamnes, and the rest they found; Vast crowds the dying and the dead surround, And the yet reeking blood o'erflows the ground. All knew the helmet which Messapus lost, But mourn'd a purchase that so dear had cost. Now rose the ruddy morn from Teton's bed, And with the dawn of day the skies o'erspread. Nor long the sun his daily course withheld, But added colours to the world reveal'd, When earthly Turnus, wak'ning with the light, All clad in armour, calls his troops to fight. His martial men with fierce harangue he fir'd, And his own ardour in their souls inspir'd. This done, to give new terrors to his foes, The heads of Nisus and his friends he shows, Rais'd high on pointed spears, a ghastly sight. Loud peals of shouts ensue, and barbarous delight. Meantime the Trojans run where danger calls; They line their trenches, and they man their walls. In front extended, to the left they stood; Safe was the right, surrounded by the flood. But, casting from their tow'rs a frightful view, They saw the faces, which too well they knew. Tho' then disguis'd in death, and smear'd all o'er With filth obscene, and dropping putrid gore, Soon hasty Fame thro' the sad city bears The mournful messages to the mother's ears. An icy cold benumbs her limbs; she shakes, Her cheeks the blood, her hand the web forsakes. She runs the rampires round amidst the war, Nor fears the flying darts; she rends her hair, And fills with loud laments the liquid air. Thus then my lov'd Euryalus appears; Thus looks the prop my declining years. Was't on this face my famish'd eyes I fed? O how unlike the living is the dead! And couldst thou leave me, cruel, thus alone? Not one kind kiss from a departing son? No look, no last adieu before he went, An ill boding hour to slaughter sent? Cold on the ground, and pressing foreign clay, To Latian dogs and fowls he lies a prey. Nor was I near to close his dying eyes, To wash his wounds, to weep his obsequies, To call about his corpse his crying friends, Or spread the mantle, made for other ends, On his dear body, which I wove with care; Nor did my daily pains or nightly labour spare. Where shall I find his corpse? What earth sustains His trunk dismember'd, and his cold remains? For this, alas, I left my needful ease, Expos'd my life to winds and winter seas. If any pity touch Rutulian hearts, Here empty all your quivers, all your darts. Or, if they fail, thou, Jove, conclude my woe, And send me thunderstruck to shades below. Her shrieks and clamours pierce the Trojans' ears, Unman their courage, and augment their fears. Nor young Ascanius could the sight sustain, Nor old Ilioneus his tears restrain; But actor and Idaeus jointly sent, To bear the madding mother to her tent. And now the trumpets terribly from far, With rattling clangour, rouse the sleepy war. The soldiers' shouts succeed the brazen sounds, And heav'n from pole to pole the noise rebounds. The Volscians bear their shields upon their head, And, rushing forward, form a moving shed. These fill the ditch, those pull the bulwarks down; Some raise the ladders, others scale the town. But where void spaces on the walls appear, Or thin defence, they pour their forces there. With poles and missive weapons from afar, The Trojans keep aloof the rising war. Taught by their 10 years' siege defensive fight, They roll down ribs of rocks, and unresisted white, To break the penthouse with a pond'rous blow. Would yet the patient Volscians undergo, But could not bear th' unequal combat long. For where the Trojans find the thickest throng, The ruin falls, their shatter'd shields give way, And their crush'd heads become an easy prey. They shrink for fear, abated of their rage, Nor longer dare in a blind fight engage; Contented now to gall them from below, With darts and slings, and with the distant bow. Elsewhere, Mezentius, terrible to view, A blazing pine within the trenches threw. But brave Messapus, Neptune's warlike son, Broke down the palisades, the trenches won, And loud for ladders calls, to scale the town. Calliope, begin, ye sacred Nine! Inspire your poet in his high design, To sing what slaughter manly Turnus made, What souls he sent below the Stygian shade, What fame the soldiers with their captain share, And the vast circuit of the fatal war. For you in singing martial facts excel; You best remember, and alone can tell. There stood a tow'r, amazing to the sight, Built up of beams, and of stupendous height. Art and the nature of the place conspir'd To furnish all the strength that war requir'd. To level this, the bold Italians join; The wary Trojans obviate their design. With weighty stones overwhelm their troops below, Shoot thro' the loopholes, and sharp jav'lins throw. Turnus, the chief, toss'd from his thund'ring hand Against the wooden walls a flaming brand. It stuck, the fiery plague; the winds were high, The planks were season'd, and the timber dry. Contagion caught the posts; it spread along, Scorch'd, and to distance drove the scatter'd throng. The Trojans fled; the fire pursued amain, Still gath'ring fast upon the trembling train, Till, crowding to the corners of the wall, Down the defence and the defenders fall. The mighty flaw makes heav'n itself resound; The dead and dying Trojans strew the ground. The tow'r that follow'd on the fallen crew Whelm'd o'er their heads, and buried whom it slew. Some stuck upon the darts themselves had sent; All the same equal ruin underwent. Young Lycus and Helenor only scape, Sav'd, how they know not, from the steepy leap. Helenor, elder of the two by birth, On one side royal, one a son of earth, Whom to the Lydian king Licymnia bare, And sent her boasted bastard to the war. a privilege which none but freemen share. Slight were his arms, a sword and silver shield; no marks of honour charg'd its empty field. Light as he fell, so light the youth arose, And rising found himself amidst his foes. Nor flight was left, nor hopes to force his way; Embolden'd by despair, he stood at bay. And like a stag, whom all the troop surrounds, O eager huntsman, and invading hounds! Resolv'd on death, he dissipates his fears, And bounds aloft against the pointed spears. So dares the youth, secure of death, and throws His dying body on his thickest foes. But Lycus, swifter on his feet by far, Runs, doubles, winds, and turns amidst the war; Springs to the walls, and leaves his foes behind, And snatches at the beam he first can find; Looks up, and leaps aloft at all the stretch, In hopes the helping hand of some kind friend to reach. But Turnus follow'd hard his hunted prey; His spear had almost reach'd him in the way, Short of his reins, and scarce a span behind. "Fool," said the chief, "thou fleeter than the wind, Couldst thou presume to 'scape when I pursue?" He said, and downward by the feet he drew The trembling dastard; at the tug he falls; Vast ruins come along, rent from the smoking walls. Thus on some silver swan, or tim'rous hare, Jove's bird comes sousing down from upper air. Her crooked talons truss the fearful prey; Then out of sight she soars, and wings her way. So seizes the grim wolf the tender lamb, In vain lamented by the bleating dam. Then, rushing onward with a barbarous cry, The troops of Turnus to the combat fly. The ditch with fagots fill'd, the daring foe Toss'd firebrands to the steepy turrets throw. Ilioneus, as bold as Lucetius, came To force the gate, and feed the kindling flame; Roll'd down the fragment of a rock so right, It crush'd him double underneath his weight. Two more young Liger and Asylas slew; To bend the bow young Liger better knew. Asylas best the pointed jav'lin threw; Brave Caeneus laid Ortygius on the plain; The victor Caeneus was by Turnus slain. By the same hand Clonius and Itys fall, Sagar and Ida standing on the wall. From Capys' arms his fate Privernus found, Hurt by Themilla first, but slight the wound. His shield thrown by, to mitigate the smart, He clapp'd his hand upon the wounded part. The second shaft came swift and unespied, And pierc'd his hand, and nail'd it to his side; Transfix'd his breathing lungs and beating heart; The soul came issuing out, and hiss'd against the dart. The son of Aeacus shone amid the rest, In glitt'ring armour, and a purple vest. Fair was his face, his eyes inspiring love; Bred by his father in the Marsian grove, Where the fat altars of Palicus flame, And send in arms to purchase early fame. Him, when he spied from far the Tuscan king, Laid by the lance, and took him to the sling. Thrice whirl'd the throng around his head, and thro' The heated lead half melted as it flew. It pierc'd his hollow temples and his brain; The youth came tumbling down, and spurn'd the plain. Then young Ascanius, who before this day Was wont in woods to shoot the savage prey, First bent in martial strife the twanging bow, And exercis'd against a human foe. With this bereft Numanus of his life, Who Turnus' younger sister took to wife. Proud of his realm, and of his royal bride, Vaunting before his troops, and lengthen'd with a stride, In these insulting terms the Trojans he defied: "Twice conquer'd cowards, now your shame is shown, Coop'd up a second time within your town, Who dare not issue forth in open field, But hold your walls before you for a shield. Thus threat you war, thus our alliance force. What gods, what madness, hither steer'd your course? You shall not find the sons of Atreus here, nor need the frauds of sly Ulysses fear. Strong from the cradle of a sturdy brood, we bear our new-born infants to the flood. There bath'd amid the stream, our boys we hold, with winter harden'd and inur'd to cold. They wake before the day, to range the wood, kill ere they eat, nor taste unconquer'd food. No sports but what belong to war they know, to break the stubborn colt, to bend the bow. Our youth, of labour patient, earn their bread; hardly they work, with frugal diet fed. From plows and harrows sent to seek renown, they fight in fields, and storm the shaken town. No part of life from toils of war is free, no change in age, or difference in degree. We plow, and till in arms our oxen feel, instead of goads, the spur and pointed steel. Th' inverted lance makes furrows in the plain. Even time, that changes all, yet changes us in vain. The body, not the mind, nor can control th' immortal vigour, or abate the soul. Our helms defend the young, disguise the gray. We live by plunder, and delight in prey. Your vests, embroider'd with rich purple, shine; in sloth you glory, and in dances join. Your vests have sweeping sleeves, with female pride; your turbans underneath your chins are tied. Go, Phrygians, to your Dindymus again; go, less than women in the shape of men. Go, mix'd with eunuchs, in the mother's rites, where with unequal sound the flute invites. Sing, dance, and howl, by turns in Ida's shade. Resign the war to men who know the martial trade." This foul reproach Ascanius could not hear With patience, or a vow'd revenge forbear. At the full stretch of both his hands he drew, And almost join'd the horns of the tough yew. But first before the throne of Jove he stood, And thus with lifted hands invoked the god: "My first attempt, great Jupiter, succeed! An annual off'ring in thy grove shall bleed, A snow-white steer, before thy altar led, Who, like his mother, bears aloft his head, Buts with his threat'ning brows, and bellowing stands, And dares the fight, and spurns the yellow sands." Jove bow'd the heavens, and lent a gracious ear, And thunder'd on the left amidst the clear. Sounded at once the bow, and swiftly flies The feather'd death, and hisses thro' the skies. The steel thro' both his temples forc'd the way; Extended on the ground Numanus lay. "Go now, vain boaster, and true valour scorn! The Phrygians twice subdued, yet make this third return." Ascanius said no more. The Trojans shake The heavens with shouting, and new vigour take. Apollo then bestrode a golden cloud, To view the feats of arms and fighting crowd. And thus the beardless victor he bespoke aloud: "Advance, illustrious youth, increase in fame, And wide from east to west extend thy name. Offspring of gods thyself, and Rome shall owe To thee a race of demigods below. This is the way to heav'n: the pow'rs divine From this beginning date the Julian line. To thee, to them, and their victorious heirs, The conquer'd war is due, and the vast world is theirs. Troy is too narrow for thy name," he said, And plunging downward shot his radiant head. Dispell'd the breathing air that broke his flight, Shorn of his beams, a man to mortal sight. Old Butes' form he took, Anchises' squire, Now left to rule Ascanius by his sire. His wrinkled visage and his hoary hairs, His mien, his habit, and his arms he wears, And thus salutes the boy: "Too forward for his years, Suffice it thee, thy father's worthy son, The warlike prize thou hast already won. The god of archers gives thy youth a part Of his own praise, nor envies equal art. Now tempt the war no more. he said, and flew, obscure in air, and vanish'd from their view. The Trojans by his arms their patron know, and hear the twanging of his heav'nly bow. Then duteous force they use, and Phoebus' name, to keep from fight the youth too fond of fame. Undaunted, they themselves no danger shun; from wall to wall the shouts and clamours run. They bend their bows, they whirl their slings around; heaps of spent arrows fall, and strew the ground, and helms and shields and rattling arms resound. The combat thickens, like the storm that flies from westward, when the show'ry kids arise, or patt'ring hail comes pouring on the main, when Jupiter descends in harden'd rain, or bellowing clouds burst with a stormy sound, and with an arm'd winter strew the ground. Pandarus and Bitias, thunderbolts of war, whom Hiera to bold Alcanor bare, on Ida's top, two youths of height and size, like firs that on their mother mountain rise, presuming on their force the gates unbar, and of their own accord invite the war. With fates averse, against the king's command, arm'd on the right and on the left they stand, and flank the passage. Shining steel they wear, and waving crests above their heads appear. Thus two tall oaks, that Padus' banks adorn, lift up to heav'n their leafy heads unshorn, and, overpress'd with nature's heavy load, dance to the whistling winds, and at each other nod. In flows a tide of Latians, when they see the gate set open, and the passage free. Bold Quercens, with rash Tmarus rushing on, Equicolus, that in bright armour shone, and Haemon first; but soon repuls'd they fly, or in the well-defended pass they die. These with success are fir'd, and those with rage, and each on equal terms at length engage. Drawn from their lines, and issuing on the plain, the Trojans hand to hand the fight maintain. Fierce Turnus in another quarter fought, when suddenly th' unhop'd for news was brought. The foes had left the fastness of their place, prevail'd in fight, and had his men in chase. He quits th' attack, and, to prevent their fate, runs where the giant brothers guard the gate. The first he met, Antipater the brave, but base begotten on a Theban slave. Sarpedon's son he slew; the deadly dart found passage thro' his breast, and pierc'd his heart. Fix'd in the wound th' Italian cornel stood, warm'd in his lungs, and in his vital blood. Aphidnus next, and Erymanthus dies, and Meropes, and the gigantic size Of Bitias, threat'ning with his ardent eyes. Not by the feeble dart he fell oppress'd; a dart were lost within that roomy breast, but from a knotted lance, large, heavy, strong, Which roar'd like thunder as it whirl'd along. Not two bull hides th' impetuous force withhold, Nor coat of double mail, with scales of gold. Down sunk the monster bulk, and press'd the ground; His arms and clatt'ring shield on the vast body sound. Not with less ruin than the Baian mole, Rais'd on the seas, the surges to control, At once comes tumbling down the rocky wall. Prone to the deep, the stones disjointed fall. Of the vast pile the scatter'd ocean flies; Black sands, discolour'd froth, and mingled mud arise. The frighted billows roll, and seek the shores; Then trembles Prochyta, then Ischia roars. Typhoeus, thrown beneath by Jove's command, Astonish'd at the flaw that shakes the land, Soon shifts his weary side, and, scarce awake, With wonder feels the weight press lighter on his back. The warrior god the Latian troops inspir'd, New strung their sinews, and their courage fir'd, But chills the Trojan hearts with cold affright. Then black despair precipitates their flight. When Pandarus beheld his brother kill'd, The town with fear and wild confusion fill'd, He turns the hinges of the heavy gate With both his hands, and adds his shoulders to the weight. Some happier friends within the walls inclos'd, the rest shut out, to certain death expos'd. Fool as he was, and frantic in his care, T' admit young Turnus, and include the war, he thrust amid the crowd, securely bold, like a fierce tiger pent amid the fold. Too late his blazing buckler they descry, and sparkling fires that shoot from either eye; his mighty members, and his ample breast, his rattling armour, and his crimson crest. Far from that hated face the Trojans flee, all but the fool who sought his destiny. Mad Pandarus steps forth, with vengeance vow'd, for Bitias' death, and threatens thus aloud: "These are not Ardea's walls, nor his the town Armata proffers with Lavinia's crown. 'Tis hostile earth you tread, of hope bereft; No means of safe return by flight are left. To whom, with countenance calm, and soul sedate, Thus Turnus: 'Then begin, and try thy fate. My message to the ghost of Priam bear; Tell him a new Achilles sent thee there.' A lance of tough ground ash the Trojan threw, Rough in the rind, and knotted as it grew. With his full force he whirl'd it first around, But the soft yielding air receiv'd the wound. Imperial Juno turn'd the course before, And fix'd the wand'ring weapon in the door. 'But hope not thou,' said Turnus, 'when I strike, To shun thy fate: our force is not alike, Nor thy steel temper'd by the Lemnian god.' Then rising, on his utmost stretch he stood, And aim'd from high: the full descending blow Cleaves the broad front and beardless cheeks in two. Down sinks the giant with a thund'ring sound; His pond'rous limbs oppress the trembling ground. Blood, brains, and foam gush from the gaping wound; Scalp, face, and shoulders the keen steel divides, And the charr'd visage hangs on equal sides. The Trojans fly from their approaching fate; And, had the victor then secur'd the gate, And to his troops without unclos'd the bars, One lucky day had ended all his wars. But boiling youth, and blind desire of blood, Push'd his fury to pursue the crowd. Hamstring'd behind, unhappy Gyges died; Then Phalaris is added to his side. The pointed jav'lins from the dead he drew, And their friends' arms against their fellows threw. Strong Halys stands in vain; weak Phlegyas flies; Saturnia, still at hand, new force and fire supplies. Then Halius, Prytanis, Alcander fall, Engag'd against the foes who scal'd the wall. But whom they fear'd without they found within. At last, tho' late, by Lynceus he was seen. He calls new succours, and assaults the prince; But weak his force, and vain is their defence. Turn'd to the right, his sword the hero drew, And at one blow the bold aggressor slew. He joins the neck, and, with a stroke so strong, The helm flies off, and bears the head along. Next him the huntsman Amycus he kill'd, In darts envenom'd, and in poison skill'd. Then Clytius fell beneath his fatal spear, And Cretius, whom the Muses held so dear. He fought with courage, and he sung the fight; Arms were his business, verses his delight. The Trojan chiefs behold with rage and grief Their slaughter'd friends, and hasten their relief. Bold Mnestheus rallies first the broken train, Whom brave Seresthus and his troops sustain. To save the living, and revenge the dead, Against one warrior's arms all Troy they led. "O, void of sense and courage!" Mnestheus cried, "Where can you hope your coward heads to hide? Ah, where beyond these rampires can you run? One man, and in your camp inclos'd you shun. Shall then a single sword such slaughter boast, And pass unpunish'd from a num'rous host? Forsaking honour, and renouncing fame, Your gods, your country, and your king you shame. This just reproach their virtue does excite. They stand, they join, they thicken to the fight. Now Turnus doubts, and yet disdains to yield, but with slow paces measures back the field, and inches to the walls, where Tiber's tide, washing the camp, defends the weaker side. The more he loses, they advance the more, and tread in every step he trod before. They shout, they bear him back, and whom by might they cannot conquer, they oppress with weight. As compass'd with a wood of spears around, the lordly lion still maintains his ground, grins horrible, retires, and turns again, threats his distended paws, and shakes his mane. He loses while in vain he presses on, nor will his courage let him dare to run. So Turnus fares, and, unresolv'd of flight, moves tardy back, and just recedes from fight. Yet twice in rage the combat he renews, twice breaks, and twice his broken foes pursues. But now they swarm, and, with fresh troops supplied, come rolling on, and rush from every side. Nor Juno, who sustain'd his arms before, dares with new strength suffice th' exhausted store. For Jove, with sour commands, sent Iris down, to force th' invader from the frighted town. With labour spent, no longer can he wield the heavy falchion, or sustain the shield. O'erwhelm'd with darts, which from afar they fling, the weapons round his hollow temples ring. His golden helm gives way, with stony blows, batter'd and flat, and beaten to his brows. His crest is rash'd away, his ample shield is falsified, and round with jav'lins fill'd. The foe now faint, the Trojans o'erwhelm, and Mnestheus lays hard load upon his helm. Sick sweat succeeds; he drops at ev'ry pore; with driving dust his cheeks are pasted o'er. Shorter and shorter ev'ry gasp he takes, and vain efforts and hurtless blows he makes. Plung'd in the flood, and made the waters fly, the yellow god the welcome burthen bore, and whipp'd the sweat, and wash'd away the gore. Then gently wafts him to the farther coast, and sends him safe to cheer his anxious host. End of Book 9 of the Aeneid. Read by Lars Rolander.